Is he happy?
No, he's somebody who not only is not usually happy, but he doesn't value happiness. If you said, what are the top 10 things you want in life? I don't think happiness, pleasure, calmness, sweetness, going to the beach, none of those would be in the top 10. And I asked him about it. I said, okay, you ever happy at what you've achieved? He said, no, I'm like a video game addict. When I get to one level of the game and I've succeeded, all I can think about is moving to the next level of the game. Musk even said empathy and collegiality can be your enemy. I remember him yelling at some of his finance people who were friendly with some of the engineers and said, no, collegiality is your enemy. You do not want them to like you. You're there to challenge them. If they like you too much, you're not doing your job. You know, Elon loves drama and turmoil, right? That's from childhood. He associates it with childhood and love. And whether it's at Twitter or at SpaceX or Tesla, he's always surging and wants drama. Well, for better or worse, I would say for worse, his emotional, personal love life tends to be that way. He likes drama and fighting and intensity in his relationships. Demon mode, as his girlfriend Grimes calls it, where he just truly gets cold and in a very bad place. We're sitting down in South Texas at the launch pad behind it and having drinks in their fire pits. And Elon is there with his mother, May, his girlfriend, Grimes, and little X. And X is playing in a fire pit, just putting things in and my instincts are go grab the kid. And Musk says to me, when I was a kid, they used to say, don't play with matches. So I got a box of matches and I played with them behind a tree. And it was his way of saying, I'm going to let X continue to do that. And May Musk said, I think it's one generation of risk seekers training the next. Yeah, one of the things that Musk is successful because of is his ability to iterate, to take risks, to conduct experiments. Twice now he's launched Starship, which, as I say, is by far the biggest rocket ever made. And both times you saw stories the next day saying, Musk launches rocket, it explodes. Well, he thinks both those were a success. Because he says if you're not failing 20% of the time, you're not risking enough. And so each of those are attempts to figure out, to take a risk, shoot something off and see what goes wrong, and then to fix it.
Have you seen moments yourself when you were following him where he was confronted by someone who had a default to telling him why things couldn't happen and why they couldn't be done?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's like 20, 30 times in the book. It's just, and he goes ballistic. I'll tell you a fun one. He was at Twitter headquarters and he looks at all the engineering things and they have 3 server farms, one in Portland, one in Sacramento, and one, I think, in Atlanta. And he does the calculus in his head and he said, we don't really need 3 different redundant server farms. And the engineers say, well, yes, we do, because we need backups and we need caching or whatever. And he says, no, you're not going back to first principles thinking. If you look at this, anyway, he decides they should get rid of the servers in Sacramento. Well, they say, fine, but that'll take 6 months and he said, no, you can do it in 6 weeks. And the engineers, and I'm sitting there in the meeting and he's getting really dark and they don't know how to deal with him because this is like a month after he took over Twitter, so they don't know this dude. And they're saying, well, no, I'm sorry, Elon, we can't do it. And he'd say, you can do it in 6 weeks. And by the end of the meeting, he said, you can do it in 6 days. He gets really dark. And he decides he's going to fire them. But it's December 23rd. So it's like 2 days before Christmas. He does fire them. But the next day, Christmas Eve, he's flying from San Francisco to Austin, Texas to go home for Christmas. He's with 2 young cousins on the plane who are engineers. And one of them says, why don't we just take those servers out ourselves? Elon Musk makes a U-turn in his airplane, tells the pilot to go to Sacramento. They were already over Nevada. They land. He rents, there are like 4 of them on the plane. They rent a truck, a sort of what we call a U-Haul truck, a rental truck. And they go to the server facility, and the guard there is like flummoxed. It's Christmas Eve, and they're forcing their way in, and they're looking at the servers. And one of the engineers says, well, we can't take them out because we need engineers to take off these elevated floors, those floor tiles where people say. And Musk turns to his bodyguard and says, do you got a pocket knife? The guy goes, yeah. And he takes a pocket knife and pulls up one of the vents, rips up the floor thing, goes underneath the floor panel with a set of wire cutters that he got from Home Depot and cuts the cable to the servers. And they start moving them out and put them in the U-Haul truck. And this is Musk and by the way, it's typical of Musk because it works fine for a few days. Then you can see the service getting a bit degraded, but then eventually it comes back. And he says, you got to take risks. If you're not sort of causing 20% of the problems from the risks you take, you're not taking enough risks. But there it is, and they got rid of that server farm in Sacramento. About 20 to 30% of the people who work with him can go march through fire with him that way and realize what he can do. But it's why 80% of the people who worked at Twitter when he took it over are gone. But it's tough to work with him. There's another scene in the book where on a late Friday night, he's down in the southern tip of Texas where they have the launch pad for Starbase. And it's a Friday night after 10 p.m. And he looks at the launch pad area and says, why are there only 3 or 4 people working? Young engineer says, well, it's a Friday night and we don't have any launches scheduled. And Musk goes dark on him and says, I want tomorrow 100 people working. I want them to come from California, Florida, get them in here, and we're going to stack this rocket, even though we're not planning to launch anytime soon, but we're going to have what's called a surge. And they fly people in. People are sleeping on the ground, on the floors, to do this surge.
When he went into Twitter, one of the very alarming things that he did was there was rumors that he called everyone up to the top floor and said, this is going to be the new company culture. If you don't like it,
Absolutely. I mean, I was there. I walked in with, I was there the day before he took over. He marches in. Two extremes of doing a company. One was the way Twitter was, which is nurturing and sweet and having yoga rooms and artisanal coffee bars. And when Musk walks in, they're showing him how we have quiet spaces for people who need to get their mental energy restored. And they said, we value psychological safety. And Musk looked at me and kind of did his raspy laugh. Says, psychological safety, blank, screw that. An urgent intensity is our operating principle. Psychological safety is our enemy. And so he turns it into a hardcore, all-in environment where you have to say, I'm all in. You're going to work 24/7, some weekends, because you're all in. And he said, I want a team that's 20% of the size, but that's an order of magnitude more intense and more all in. I've watched so many meetings where, even at Twitter, where somebody says, we can't do this. We can't take away the blue checks. Or we can't change from carbon fiber to stainless steel on a particular component. Or we can't do Cybertruck because Cybertruck is too edgy and it's made of stainless steel and it is frightening to look at and it'll scare people. And he'll just either run roughshod over them or fire them or push them to realizing, let's make Cybertruck look very futuristic and let's make it totally out of stainless steel. And let's have the stainless steel be an exoskeleton so you don't have to have internal chassis as much. These are wild, out-of-the-box things. And they resisted him on Cybertruck. They resisted him on Starship. They resisted him on even some of the battery changes.
The reason he's setting deadlines, even though he knows sometimes they might not be hit, is because it speeds up the team.
Yeah, he says all-in intensity, a hardcore intensity is our operating principle. And you're not going to have that without deadlines. I remember so many times there were what his team calls surges. I'd see it happen almost every month in a different field. He'd say, all right, we have to stack this rocket by Friday. And they'd say, no, it's going to take months. No, it needs to be stacked by Friday. And they'd work around the clock and do it. And then a few weeks later, he'd be on a house where they were putting a Tesla solar roof tiles. And he'd say, you have 24 hours to redo this house. And they'd say, well, that's nuts. But he'd be there at midnight on top of the roof.
Himself,
with a little X playing on the cables down below. And he would use it as a forcing function. It drove the teams crazy, but it drove them to do things they didn't think they could do.